Hey everyone, welcome to the Powerful Entrepreneur Podcast, episode 6. The title of this podcast is A Symbol of Legacy. I'm your host, Arthur Shulsky. My co-host, Nolan Zandy. Say hi, Nolan.
Hello, everybody. Nolan Zandy here. Looking forward to it.
In the news lately, there has been a lot of talk about Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and so that kind of inspired this show that we are going to be spending a good 30 minutes, 40 minutes talking about. We got a lot of great information. We spent the last week reading pretty much everything we can get our hands on, some first-hand account stuff. I dug up my old Julius Caesar memoirs of his Gallic invasions. Nolan, I'm sure you did a bunch of research. This is going to be a good time.
Definitely. Really looking forward to discussing this topic. It's one that I think that has been in our background, one we've been absorbing our whole lives. It's such a global institution, and recent events has brought it, into light, maybe from a sad perspective, but I think at the conclusion of our podcast, there's going to be a lot to be hopeful for, a lot to be excited about, and a lot more to read.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to read. It's pretty overwhelming. We're going to go through about 2 millennia worth of history. So I think everyone keeps saying this 800-year number. And that's just the age since they laid the first brick was 800 years. But really, the story starts 2 millennium ago.
It does. This is a story of legacy. This is a story of careful branding, careful construction, and careful planning that, 1163 when they laid the first brick. And it goes to the legacy laid apart by ancient civilizations before that and how that legacy carries over to the modern day. It's really exciting.
Yeah, so we're really excited. I think we're going to just jump right in to one of the earliest time periods with any sort of recorded history in Western Europe, and that is the Roman era. And how I want to start this is talking about, when the Romans invaded Gaul, which is, modern France. It was pretty much entirely like Celtic barbarian. It's like what the old Gauls were. And Julius Caesar has written in his memoirs of the conquering of Gaul. It's a phenomenal first-hand account. You can still read it today of his kind of adventures, the war that took him. I think it was a good part of his life. He was in Gaul fighting, and then what led to his power, occupying Gaul. But he had mentioned a people along the Seine River.
Absolutely. I think it was a critical point for him being in that area as it is today.
Yeah, this was later. They were knee deep in their military excursions into Gaul. Julius Caesar, later would have one of his more famous decisions that he had to make of where is he going to conquer next after getting to this part of Gaul. But he noticed a people called, and I think he called them the Parisi, and that was a Gallic tribe, and he had referenced them on an island along the major river, and this Gallic tribe kind of stood out from some of the others because of where they were situated on this island in the middle of a river, and Julius Caesar had an encounter with them. And I think there was a very mutual respect between the Roman people and the Gauls of that region. I'm not sure if there was any sort of military conflicts between the two, but very quickly, those Gauls were incorporated into the Roman Empire and became Roman Gallic. And then around the 1st century, and I guess I should say this, historians and archaeologists are not 100% certain if that island that Julius Caesar is referencing is the Ile de la Cité, which is the Isle of the City, which is the island that Notre Dame Cathedral is situated. The archaeologists don't necessarily know if that is the island Julius Caesar was referring to, but there is a chance that it could have been. The problem is that they haven't really found any Gallic archaeology sites or dig sites or any sort of artifacts from that time period on the island. They have found artifacts on other islands near that area. So it's kind of a controversial point in historical sciences. In the 1st century AD, what happened is the Romans and the Gauls kind of came together and built this city We're right around right now where like the Pantheon is in France or in Paris, and kind of in between Notre Dame Cathedral and the Pantheon, which is one of the first settlements in Paris that would be considered Roman Gallic. And it blew up. It expanded. It grew really fast, and they had set up, some religious pagan institutions on the island during that time. And the island immediately was a very important spiritual place for these Roman Gallic people. And then it wasn't until the 4th century when they had discovered, I think it's called, I'm trying to find my notes, what the correct term for it was, but it's the Pillar of the Boatmen. I can't find the French term. I think it's Pilier de Nautica. I think that's what it is. I have to look through my notes, but that makes sense. And this pillar was dedicated to the deity Jupiter, which is obviously a Greco-Roman style deity. And the Pillar of the Boatmen was a kind of a Gallic interpretation of that deity. Kind of the salt of the earth, that pantheon of gods that the pagan Gauls really appreciated. And it just kind of goes to show that that part of Paris, that island, for 2 millennia now, has been a site of intense spiritual enlightenment for whether it's pagan barbarians, Roman pagans, early Christians, late Christians, even now modern day spiritual renaissance. So it's pretty cool to think about.
It's a testament to location. It's so interesting that they have not or yet to have found Roman artifacts from the Julius Caesar period on that island, because I think it's so obvious that as a location, it is such a central place, and it quickly became a monument to the greatest gods in Roman times, and then quickly to, God in the Christian era. And I think it makes so much logical sense to us to see that as such a central place, because it is, I'm sure even as a remote village, it was still a majestic sight to see that large island in the middle of such a critical river. And you can see by the long-term evidence how quickly it was turned into a monument to the greatest gods. So I find it so unbelievable that in the early days they may have avoided it, or there is no evidence there. I think that on an intuitive level, you can see how it just draws people into the center. And it's the importance of location, especially when you're building a monument to what is supposed to be eternal, your religion, the thing that's truly, truly right in your life, that is supposed to have always been there and will always be there. It makes so much sense that that's centered right there and has continued to do so. And I think that's a story not only of religion, but of institutions in general. And that's true for branding. That's true for business. That's true, in so many walks of life. And it's only natural that obviously it would have gravitated there from the beginning. It often just looks so obvious looking back. And I think this is one of those examples. And it makes me really wonder if they are going to discover a link to the earliest times to that island at some point in the future.
Yeah, it would be pretty interesting to see. There's a lot. I mean, I've been there, I think about last October, I was just there, and there's a lot going on. It is a integral part of Paris. Really cool spot. There's so much to see. I think when the news kind of broke of the fire, a lot of people kind of immediately saw it as like a temple of Christian worship. But in reality, it's not just a modern temple of Christian worship. I mean, this Notre Dame is the pinnacle of symbolism for mankind's quest to understand the spiritual realm. I mean, exactly. For 2 millennium, that island has been, mankind trying to find some connection. What is the definition of faith? It's the unprovable. It is our connection to ethical dilemma, society's place within the roots of tradition, our conversations with our ancestors that are no longer here. This is
in many ways it's a center of purpose. It's very important, and like you said exactly, especially these days. But for a while now, the Ile de la Cité and the Notre Dame has been about more than one specific religion or one specific denomination. It's been a reminder of the central place to spiritual fulfillment, what that means in all of our lives. And it is unsurprising, but so interesting that it has always been like that before Christianity, since then, through the highs and lows. And so I totally agree. I think it is about much more than a specific religion. And the site, that central site on the Ile de l'Isate, truly, I think, illustrates that. Makes it very obvious.
If we think about it like that, and we think about modern business, we always want to think about what is our business there to do? Is it a short-lived thing? Are we always thinking of our business just what are we going to do in the next week? What are we going to do in the next day? I think most entrepreneurs, if not every entrepreneur I've ever met, at least all the serious ones, they like to think of their business as something that they could champion for a very long time. Something that has sustained impact, not just the flavor of the month.
I think definitely with the entrepreneurs, we prefer to associate ourselves in the way that the philosophies that we live by. I think it's very relevant. Not every entrepreneur, not every successful entrepreneur thinks that way, but the ones that last, the ones that want to last, the ones that care about legacy, thinking in that kind of law. I mean, it's just so very clear with Notre Dame, and we'll get to that as we get to the cathedral itself.
Yeah.
Both before and after, that they thought about the very long term. They thought about developing a legacy, developing an institution, trying to do something not just for their own lives and for the lives of the current patrons, the current founders, so to speak, to use a very secular term, but for their forebears and for those that come after. And I find that very powerful. And you can see that in the origins of the site. It was a clear choice for that very purpose. And to see that kind of long-term thinking from the beginning it's always something that touches me personally, because I think that every institution, including your own business, should be more than just yourself.
I think, call me an optimist, but even a lot of the Instagram talent that I work with, some of those young talented Instagrammers, they think this way. I mean, they bring that into their business, and they want to have an impact on people in a positive way for a long time. I think that's just kind of human nature. Our connection with our ancestors' faith, whether that be pagan or Christian or whatever, that island represents, really demonstrates how whatever progress in society is present, it really can never truly usurp our longing desire for that which is unreachable. And that kind of purpose, I think it was Aristotle who said that humanity constantly pursues perfection innately. It's all connected. It's humanity's consistent pursuit of perfection, this beautiful Notre Dame Cathedral being the pinnacle of architecture and symbolism and legacy, our connection with our ancestors, and how our present legacy in our current time is so tied to exactly what our ancestors did when they were alive. It's amazing.
Agreed. And that ability of ours to look back at our own ancestry and look back at institutions that date that far back also means that in the future people will be able to look back on us, and it's a reminder that things are remembered and things do go forward. And if we can look back now and understand the foundations of a strong legacy, in 1,000 years people can look back on us thinking the same way, and I find that inspiring.
I like where you're going with that, Nolan. I think what we need to do is jump into the Middle Ages.
Definitely.
What do you think?
I think it's time. It's a long history. We have a lot to get through, so I think it is time.
We're gonna jump like 1,000
which
years.
Is the point. It's the point, the illustration of what this site, what this institution, and how long it's lasted. I think that's the whole point of this conversation. So let's jump ahead.
All right, in like 2 seconds, we're gonna jump like 1,200 years. So, when we think of like Notre Dame, I think we can't help but feel like the awe of elegance, right? To me, like one of the coolest facts that I had read about was, and I think it's the Poor People's Book. That's what they had called it, because the church, and if you go there, it's very obvious. It is a visual representation of a story. It is a visual kind of cue of all the important characters that came about in the Christian lineage, even pre-Christian lineage, even all the way back to Judaism, created in this beautiful marble inlay and stone inlay and the rose windows and all the stained glass, all the colored portraits within the church itself. The entire church is dedicated to this visual depiction of biblical message, the biblical story. When I was there in October, every time I go there, I'm just dumbfounded by how beautiful and elegant it is. But I was thinking about it in an interesting way when obviously the fires happened, and I kind of couldn't help but compare that visual storytelling they embraced in designing and building Notre Dame and comparing it to the modern day. And if you think about how we communicate today, I mean, over the last decade, our global society has invested trillions of dollars, billions of man hours in the visual display of messages and information. And we've revolutionized that. We've digitized it. We've made it super accessible. That's not necessarily literacy, right? It's just a visual display of information. That is exactly what the people who built Notre Dame Cathedral did 800 years ago. The exact same thing. They invested time and labor in visually depicting information so that people that could not access, people that were illiterate, people that didn't have the money to buy a book, could access those stories, could be inspired by it. Not just religiously inspired, but I'm talking creatively inspired. How many lawyers, politicians, doctors, merchants, soldiers, husbands, wives, children, it doesn't matter. How many people were inspired by their craft just through those visual storytelling techniques that they incorporated on Notre Dame Cathedral?
It's so powerful. It's such a powerful lesson for today, but also through history. The investment, the layers of the design and construction of Notre Dame, both, over the top of an old Roman temple, over the top of previous churches, a place that had current institutional significance, and then their desire to represent themselves and to turn themselves into a long-term understood idea with wide understanding by exactly investing in the people that come to the church or come to the cathedral, not just the clergy that were literate, not just the kings that wanted to associate themselves with such a magnificent building and a magnificent institution, but to make sure that every individual person, whether they were literate or not, came away with an understanding of the message that the church wanted to spread. It's such an early example, although I'm sure it even goes back much further in terms of graffiti and even hieroglyphics, but it's such a early example of a building that still stands, that's still so powerful today. Understanding who's coming to the institution and making sure that every person that goes there gets to hear your message, gets to hear and spread the message, and to make sure no one leaves without an understanding of what you're trying to display. It's such a respect for the consumer on a certain level, the patron, the churchgoer, no matter how humble. The importance of the word of mouth, the importance of the experience of the user was always, I don't even like saying the word user for a religious artifact, the patron, the attendee, regardless of their background. It's something that we obviously, I think, honestly, has taken off again. Just having that respect for the people that come there and the willing to invest in patrons all the way to the bottom floor. I think that's just something that's commonly overlooked, but is so important to its longevity, so important to its reputation, and so important to the fact that there has been that support, people that go there and feel like it's speaking to them directly and not just the people over their head. So I really want to emphasize what you just said. I think that's such a critical part of the original design, the way people thought long-term from the beginning.
And just to add what you said, Nolan, is, like you said, I hate to use modern business terminology when explaining something like this, but I mean, if you think about who's the church's target market, I mean, who has the church's target market been forever? Everybody. Everyone.
Exactly.
Sermon on the Mount, right? That's exactly what Jesus' message was. It's everybody. And So whether it be the most illiterate person in the room, someone who like maybe they spell their name with an X, maybe they've never even signed their name. Who knows, right? Like, gosh, imagine being a 14th century peasant.
Exactly.
Or all the way up to like the scribe or the accountant or the lawyer or some noble king, the people that can read and have read Plato and Confucius and legalism, these guys in the 14th, 15th century. All those people had something to take away when they would visit. And that's no different than your business and whoever your target market, whoever you're attracting to your business, to your message. You want every single person who visits your website, who comes to your store, who looks at your social media, to walk away with some sort of either inspiration or understands your conviction.
It builds institutional support. Even if the primary funders of money or the primary source of power might be business people or the elite or people with institutional power, you have to realize that still comes from that popular support, that they still understanding the knowledge, the widespread institutionalization, the common knowledge of the existence of what you're trying to build adds such a fundamental layer of the long-term viability of your institution, of your business. You can see after the fires how much widespread support there was from the top to bottom, how that rewards you in the long run to have a place where everybody who goes there feels like they've been spoken to, even if in the short run, perhaps many or the majority of the people that are there aren't really contributing to the financial or the evangelizing or the supportive power of your institution. It pays back. It comes back because in a time of need or in a time of neglect from a smaller number of patrons, you get that widespread support. You get those options for the future. So never ever forget, every person that don't underestimate. Always show respect for every person that wants to come and visit your institution, regardless of the contribution they'll make tomorrow. And I think that's just the perfect illustration of it.
I hate to do this, but it's top of mind. The NFL draft was the last 2 days. Okay, we're gonna go in a different place. All right. That's a modern church. I mean, let's admit. I mean, how many people watch the NFL draft? A couple 100 million? It's amazing. And I'm watching the NFL draft, and, we were preparing for this, podcast episode. I've been writing, a little bit of blog articles about it and doing my research. And I couldn't help but, while I'm watching the NFL draft, to understand there are two types of people watching the NFL draft. There are the types of people that understand every player, every skill, how fast someone runs, where they're going. Are they going to be really good on this team, or they're not going to be good on this team, or is their personality a conflict with this coach? There's those people. But then there's the people like me who I watch the NFL draft casually because I want to see the cool suits. I want to see the guy get drafted and go up there with a pink suit with the, inlaid of his college. And it's just like this $2,000 suit that this guy got. And to me, that's a visual representation. It's just visual symbolism. I'm not super invested in the draft. I'm not invested in the knowledge of the draft. I'm not invested in the NFL hardly at all anymore. But I love the visual symbolism when I watch the NFL draft. These young, hardworking men who have earned a seat at one of the top organizations, top institutions. And I get to watch that. And it gets to be a part of that experience. And the NFL knows that. So if you think about the tactics that the Catholic Church utilized in building Notre Dame Cathedral, it's identical to the tactics the NFL uses today when they do a massive media event like the NFL draft.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point.
It's pretty cool to think about. We're going to get back. We're going to stop talking about the NFL draft. I promise. But so, Nolan, do you have anything left to say about like the Middle Ages? Because we got a lot to talk about with this Renaissance and the Revolution.
Well, there's a lot to say, but I think that I think it is definitely time to continue to move forward and encourage, everybody to read about the construction and the original planning of Notre Dame, because I think it's very powerful how much they realized about the centrality and the place of this institution for the long run from the beginning in the designs of the Gothic architecture, the statues, the visual representation throughout, not just in the stained glass panels, but in the statues that were often destroyed during the French Revolution, which we're about to discuss. The amount of light, the gargoyles on the outside, the central place that it was used to crown kings and bask in the power that the institution had brought among its many patrons. And so definitely encourage anybody to read more about its construction and its early use, because there are so many lessons in terms of building a long-term business in there. But I think we gave a great initial taste of some of the things that we discovered as we were reading.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, the Middle Ages, everything from, the early church, and the building of the church, through the bubonic plague. I mean, the Viking invasions. Oh man, there's a lot to go. There's a lot to talk about. But we will jump right into. I think we're going to jump about 400 years.
About that, exactly.
400, 500 years to the Revolution and pre-Napoleon. So this is like, during France's post-Renaissance.
It was like the classical period, classical and
Enlightenment
neoclassical period.
Was that
Enlightenment?
Yeah, Enlightenment period.
Which was part of the problem. I'm not sure if the French monarchs were as fully on board with the Enlightenment as the people and philosophers and bourgeois in France at the time. And so we're approaching a period of conflict within a growing empire.
Yes, and the French monarchs had been ruling for forever, ever since good old Charles Martel and all them, and the French were the first ones to throw out this idea that a monarch and their children can rule over a society. And so the French Revolution happened. It was a big deal. This is pre-American Revolution, also, right? Was it pre-Revolution? Yeah.
The French Revolution began in 1789, which is the very end of the American Revolution.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
I think the signing of the Constitution was right around the same time.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. So it's like right after.
Right after.
Right
exactly.
after.
But preluding during as well. They were very inspired. In fact, obviously we know the story of Benjamin Franklin in France, developed a close alliance. So there was a lot of paying attention to that revolution and the Enlightenment fundamentals of it. I think it's an important part.
I think the Union, though. When was the Union in the United States? When did they unionize? Because there was like the state confederacy for like 5 years or something like that.
I think it was.
We're going on a rabbit trail right now.
We're going. The Articles of Confederation.
Yeah.
I believe ended in 1789. Yep, it was the Constitution itself was signed and put into effect, and the Union created in 1789.
Got it.
The Articles of the American War ended in 1781, but it was pretty rickety for the next 8 years, and then. The Constitution, which I think was very heavily read in France. The Declaration of Independence obviously was as well, was very influential.
Oh, big time.
Studied very closely by a lot of French intellectuals.
Yeah, big time. And, the United States and France had a lot in common. For example, we both hated the British. And that was what united us primarily, but the fact that we were both anti-monarch was a camaraderie both nations held. Both revolutions, unfortunately, had to be conducted with violence because there was such this monarchical power over the entire nation, and there was only one way to dispatch that. And that was through physical revolution. Getting on the streets with your neighbors, going down to the church, and they had these statues of these kings in the front of the Notre Dame. They destroyed them. That was just one part of the revolution. I imagine it being a pretty wild time in Paris at that point. But
absolutely,
one of the most iconic points is when they destroyed these statues of these kings that were made out of stone. So all these upset working class people saw the crowns on the top of these heads of these statues and thought, "Oh, monarchs, we're going to destroy them." And so they destroy these statues in anger. And later it's discovered that these statues that they had destroyed were not French monarchs at all. They were like old Judean, biblical, like King Herod, I think might have been one of them. Monarchs from Jesus' time. So nothing to do with the French monarchy. So, but just one story from like an impassioned revolution and how Notre Dame fits into that.
Notre Dame, I think, in the 1700s, leading up to the French Revolution, they made some decisions and some alliances and integrations that I think, looking back, kind of brought them away from their original long-term legacy mission, that creation of permanence, that decision to build over the temple of Jupiter and lead it toward that permanent kind of religious offering to that personal purpose that people are looking for, that religious spiritual purpose. And they started aligning themselves with the secular government, the way to gain money and government and power and influence. And this had been, on up and down in the institution of the Catholic Church for centuries. But leading into that magnificence era, that classical era, kings were being crowned there. Statues of secular figures and kings were being erected there. And when you do that in a business as well, and sometimes it makes sense if you understand the consequences of what you're doing. But when you partner yourself not with an institution that you can subsume and make your own and make truly your own, like say the old Temple of Jupiter, where they built over the top of it and they took those followers and converted them and brought them into the spiritual realm and into the church. But when you ally yourself with institutions that you can't control, you're going to suffer the reputational problems if they suffer. You're going to bring the problems of those alliances, of those other partners. They're going to become your problems. And when the legitimacy, and this was even before the French revolutions, there were the wars of the Huguenots, Protestants in France, and then of course the secular revolutionaries in revolutionary France. And your primary partner that you attached yourself to grow glory, grow in reputation, grow in power, grow in money. When they struggle, you struggle. And so when the French Revolution ran its course, and there were actually subsequent revolutions in 1830, after Napoleon and before, you had rioters who associated the cathedral not with its long-term spiritual purpose, the legacy and the spiritual legacy of the Ile de la Cité and that site since 100 AD, but with the current climate, the current king, current problems within government. I think everybody knows that governments, especially individual leaders, are not permanent. And when you ally yourself, you're supposed to be a permanent institution, but you ally yourself with those that aren't, then you invite that wrath. And that involved, yes, the smashing of the statues throughout the inside of the church, many of them not secular, many of them religious kings and King David and other depictions, smashing of the beautiful bells, gargoyles that had their heads cut off, wood that was damaged. The spire, people talk about the spire that burned, heavily damaged during that period and had to be replaced later. It's the consequence in a certain level of separating that timeless brand to a current one. And when that current brand fades, it became one of the lowest points in Notre Dame's history. And I think there's a lot of lessons to learn there.
I think it's interesting to think about the impassioned present. Humans always kind of have this idea that, and going back to Aristotle, the constant pursuit, the innate pursuit of perfection. The only way to be a perfectionist is to have your current state be an annoyance. Doesn't matter what you've done, what you've accomplished. It's not perfect, right? That's humanity. And
Always
they're
a dissatisfaction.
always in dissatisfaction, always in annoyance. 2019, is there a better time to think about that? I mean, you read the news, everyone's annoyed, everyone's annoying. And no different then, no different during the French Revolution and the impassioned moment. I think they destroyed all the stained glass except for the West Rose window, which is still the original from the 13th century. It's crazy to think about. But those impassioned few cause a ripple effect in history.
It's important to be wary of that when you're building your own brand and to be careful who you ally with. I think that you can invite this tertiary wrath, these impassioned people, when you don't build your reputation independently. You know, when you build your own reputation, when you build your own branding, you can control this message. You can dialogue with these few people yourselves. But when you don't, then you have to rely on your partner to dialogue with them. And if they don't do that, or if they're not effective at doing that, the passion of a very small group of people, although the French Revolution was by no means a small group of people, but even the passion of a small group of people, there can be little you can do to stop it. You know, it's important to understand that you have to be careful about how the actors around you are affecting your reputation and affecting the relations with certain people in society.
And what business doesn't want a passionate following, a passionate community? But you're going to have, every brand's going to have outliers on one side and outliers on the other side.
You want them to be your passionate following too. I mean, that's what's so important. I mean, you don't want it to be the French state's passionate following for and against. You don't want that to become your following. You really want it to be your following, because you can dialogue. Passionate people can be some of the most powerful people within your brand, and you can dialogue with them when they're your fans. But when they're the passionate fans or enemies of someone else that is associating you with them, you lose that control. I think that the cathedral was founded on.
And humans hate being controlled.
Agreed.
And that is the basis of the French Revolution. And that's the basis of why they attacked the church, because they felt like it was the controlling institution. It was a part of that. It was a part of that problem.
It was a part of the problem. Exactly. They were not independent from the problems that the country itself was suffering from.
So people take action when they feel like they're locked in a cage. It's the one thing humans hate more than anything, being locked in a cage. You know, kind of moving on towards just a macro idea of what we've been talking about is the symbol of legacy. Is the way we view history is symbolic, right? And it's just the way it is, right? When we think of history, we think of certain names, certain dates, certain events, certain things. Every time. It's just symbolism. Absolutely. It really directly feeds into the view we have towards our current society. Us falling prey to that apathetic mindset of our lineage, that is when not only is history destroyed, but our history is destroyed. I kind of want to tie this into very modern business kind of, I don't want to say case study, but maybe a little game theory. We'll do a little game theory here going on, Nolan.
Certainly.
I really want us to think about how we build trust in new acquaintances, right? When we meet a new person, let's say it's at work, at a networking event, maybe it's at your house, maybe it's not, whatever, any new acquaintance. Well, what happens when this new acquaintance you're meeting begins to talk very negatively about another individual who's not present at that conversation, right? He walks in the room and Joe leaves and this new acquaintance just starts talking smack on Joe. That negative dialogue initiates that frontal cortex, right? The part of your brain that does the strategic thinking. What we have is we assume immediately in our frontal cortex that individual who is talking negative about someone who's not present will do the same to us.
Exactly.
It's that reciprocal event of this person is obviously conducting himself in a certain way. We assume that is going to happen to us. History.
It sets the potential. I just want to emphasize that what that person is doing is setting the potential. You know now what they're capable of. So that means that it could apply to anyone, including yourself, in the future.
History is the same way. It really falls into the same rules. And how we view history is going to determine how history views us. If we spend our time focusing on frivolous, short-lived desires, what value will the future have with us? If we concentrate on the stories of our ancestors, learning from them, bringing those to fruition, and ensure that the future is a place full of impactful choices from our modern time, we, as a 21st century society, as millennials, as Gen Z, as baby boomers, as Gen Xers, doesn't matter who you are, we may someday have an 800-year-old legacy.
Definitely. It's an inspiring thought, isn't it?
I think so.
I think so as well.
What do you think, Nolan?
That's a powerful conclusion. I think I want to spend just a minute just talking about it was never, I never want to say that Notre Dame lost its significance for a period, but it definitely lost its permanent mission, that 800-year legacy, during that early 1800s period, late 1700s, where it stopped becoming a place of the past and future and became a part of the present, became tied to the government. It became tied to making money, to business people and bourgeois and anti-bourgeois. After that, they relearned all of the lessons of its founding. They invested in their reputation as not just a religious institution, but a symbol of history, a symbol of heritage, a symbol of a place to see the development of so many things, from architecture to religion to politics. The investment in Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was not a religious book. It was just a book that was both a good book, but also one that was funded for and used as a PR opportunity for the site itself. The lands of the cathedral became public lands. It was moving away from the money-making opportunities of some members of the church that had been implicated in certain scandal, but not a partisan government-owned land, not associated with any king, with any political party or any particular leader, but for the public itself and the taxpayers at large. Those wondering why the church itself isn't footing the bill for the reconstruction in its entirety, that's part of the reason, is that they're not totally allowed to. That separation, that investment in diffusing its symbolism from any particular transitory secular ideal or place, whether it's a type of government or a person or a king or a political leader, has paid huge dividends. It's a testament to the symbolism of the site more than the day-to-day power, that long-term thinking. It's promotion as a tourist site, not just for the religious place to study, but for anybody to gain access to that sense of history. I think all that led to what we have today, which is the enormous support for Reconstruction, probably more funding than it's seen in decades after the event of this fire. And I think it's also a reminder that the sense of history will not disappear with the damage that it's sustained. It has sustained so much damage in the past, from the loss of stone glass windows to the destruction of the original spire. The current spire is only from the mid 1800s, I think 1868 or something like, that burned down here. The roof, not the original. I know the roof collapsed in this fire, not the original roof. But it doesn't matter, because we still we still get the awe and the presence of the fact that the church has been reconstructed multiple times. And it means that this current setback really won't be much of a setback at all. It won't lose any of the power of the symbolism it had. It won't lose its sense of history as long as it continues to invest in itself as a timeless artifact, but one that speaks to everyone who goes through its doors, like it did from day one that invests in every tourist, every person that goes through, and not just its specific quote-unquote target market. If it can stick to those principles, which it has since the 1800s, I think you'll see any time that there's damage, any setback that it might suffer, you will see the kind of support you saw in the last few weeks, where it will be invested in and rebuilt in no time. You won't even know anything happened to it. And it'll be a continuation of what has been occurring over the last 800 years since completion, really almost 1,000 years since start, and 2,000 years since it was an invested in site with the current purpose that it has today. I think you'll just see that continue, and it's a reminder of careful planning, avoiding and learning from alliances and partnerships that cause you to lose the narrative over your own site, and the timeless structure of awe and wonder that we all get when we visit it to this day, that I think never needs to end.
I think that's a beautiful place to call the end of our little show here. And I call it little show because honestly, we probably could have done an entire 7-part series on Notre Dame's history.
Easily.
So, but this is our subtle little testament to such a beautiful tradition, 2 millennia long. Let's not forget that.
Agreed.
Thank you so much, Nolan.
Thank you, Arthur.
This has been a lot of fun. So yeah, I guess we're looking forward to the next podcast. I think the next podcast we're doing is Charlemagne again.
Indeed. Looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah.
That is a multi-part podcast, but there's so much to get through, so many lessons to learn, and we will dive into each and every one of those.
I'm Arthur Schulze signing off for the Powerful Entrepreneur Podcast. See you next time.